CNN Global Affairs analyst Kimberly Dozier joins us now live in Washington. Kimberly, it's good to see you. So just symbolically, having the death of Mohammed Sinwar announced this on the 600th day since the October 7th attacks that led to this ongoing war, now Israel's longest in its history. Jeremy also alluded to the possibility that this could lead to the sealing of a deal in terms of a ceasefire and hostage release deal. We're not there yet. I'm just wondering, from your perspective and expertise, what leverage, if any, does Prime Minister Netanyahu have in bringing this death to some of the members of his coalition that have been so resistant to a deal?
Well, Sinwar's death could be one of the reasons we've seen a delay in negotiations, because who now is the top guy who signs off on any compromise with Israel? Hamas is probably struggling to figure that out. That said, from the Israeli public point of view, how much more does Netanyahu's government have to do to smash Hamas? They've taken out all of the top leadership, left it in ruins, yet the Netanyahu government is still planning to occupy something like 75% of the Gaza Strip in the next 2 months. Perhaps that's a negotiating tactic to convince the remnants that are left of Hamas that they'd rather have a 2-month ceasefire that's on the table. And that is a chance for getting some of the remaining hostages who are alive out. Of course, what Hamas has done is when Israeli rescue teams reach them, they've often killed hostages. So it's one of those horrible situations. If you know where a hostage is, do you try to rescue them, or do you just try to put more pressure on the militants? So it's a very uncertain time, but if surely Israel saved this information about confirming Sinwar's death for this day to send a political message to its own people that, you know, we're getting somewhere with this war, and to send a message to Hamas that they will not escape the reach of Israeli justice.
I want to pivot slightly, Kimberly, just to talk about Israel's relationship with the U.S. right now. Opposition leader Yair Lapid essentially was in the Knesset today accusing Netanyahu of ruining Israel's relationship with the United States, specifically, obviously, with President Trump. He said, and I'm quoting here, the U.S. made a deal with the Houthis behind your back without you knowing. The U.S. president, met with the president of Syria without you knowing. He renewed ties with Erdogan without you knowing. He brought you to Washington and informed you that he'd returned to negotiating with Iran and did not bother to update you. Just walk us through how Netanyahu navigates the relationship with President Trump. Obviously, President Trump, as we all know, is very unpredictable. But what does Netanyahu need to do in order to get the U.S. back on Israel's side, at least in terms of making sure that both countries are seen from the same hymn book?
Well, you can see that Netanyahu is at least trying to cooperate in terms of meeting with the Middle East envoy Witkoff and acting as if a possible ceasefire is on the table, even if they may not be serious about going through with it. One of the problems that Netanyahu faces staying in power is a couple of the parties that are part of his coalition are hardline and even want to reoccupy the Gaza Strip and send settlers back in to live there. So Netanyahu's on a knife's edge, trying to keep the U.S. mostly on side while having to carry out very harsh actions that continue to bring international condemnation. And even a retired Israeli prime minister is now calling what Israel is doing in the Gaza Strip war crimes. So to have that kind of reaction is sort of Netanyahu's nightmare, but he's stuck in this situation where he's got to do these things to stay in power. One more thing I wanted to mention on Iran. The October 7th attacks have led to a decimation of Iran's proxies overseas, its proxies in Lebanon. It lost the Assad network in Syria, and now it's at a crux where it's in a weak position What Netanyahu wants to do is follow that through with a strike to damage as much of Iran's nuclear weapons complex that Israel believes exists as possible. But of course, what Trump wants is to expand the Abraham Accords, turn the Middle East into a business opportunity, and an expanded war, a strike on Iran doesn't fit with that. So you're going to see Trump and Netanyahu staying at odds for all of those different geopolitical reasons.
Kim, you mentioned that op-ed from the former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert. I actually interviewed him yesterday on CNN, where he went into much further detail as to why he ultimately decided to write that now, and saying that Israel is in fact committing war crimes in Gaza. He has been a longtime critic of Prime Minister Netanyahu and critical of this war and the direction it had been going in, but had waited until now to finally come to the conclusion that, in his view, war crimes were indeed committed. He also went on to say that it was only President Trump who ultimately could get Prime Minister Netanyahu with pressure to end the war, for a ceasefire and hostage deal to finally come into place. And I'm curious, despite the daylight, the growing daylight, however you want to describe the relationship as it stands now between the president and prime minister. Yes, he welcomed him to the Oval Office only to embarrass him by telling him that he is talking to Iran. But he hasn't publicly pushed for the war to end, which he could do. What do you make of that?
Yeah, what's running underneath all of this is the fact that the weapons shipments from the U.S. that are enabling this nightmare in Gaza are continuing. The Israeli government just celebrated earlier this week, I believe it was the 800th air shipment and the 140th shipment by sea of armored vehicles, missiles, every sort of weapon you could imagine to prosecute this ongoing war. If Trump really wants to send a signal to Netanyahu that the U.S. has had enough of this flattening of Gaza, he would stop that weapons train. Until we see something like that, which is also something the Biden administration tried, we're not going to see a cessation of violence in the Gaza Strip. Nobody else except Trump. Yeah.
Kimberly, I would just argue that I don't even think it would require President Trump to threaten to withhold aid. Even just the public message of President Trump delivering the stop this war now and agree to a deal. I would imagine, given a Republican president telling that to the Prime Minister of Israel, that would be pressure enough.
I agree with you, but at this point, what is driving Trump to do that? His side of the party, his side of the American public isn't lobbying for a stop to the violence in Gaza. They even applaud his Gaza Riviera plan, which is to move all the Palestinians out. What's increasingly happened in this conflict is the various different sides do not see each other as people, do not see their suffering as people. And as someone who covered the pre-Oslo peace accords and thought we were seeing peace in the Middle East some 20, 30 years ago, this is really painful to watch happen. And I don't know where we go from here.
All right, a very somber, but sadly, realistic way to end this conversation on the 600th day of the war. Kimberly Dozier, thank you.